I am right now very soon going to speak of a mysterious and mystical picture in Germany, which I discovered, along with many other people. I discovered about in the 1970s, probably 1975, and now has become quite popular. Let me see. I will have a few black and white reproductions of this painting, which is in Germany and which since then a lot of people have become quite interested in. In connection with that, I will begin by sharing with you some of the information which I was alluding to before, but probably did not have exactly, since last week, very close to the death day of Madame Blavatsky, we concentrated primarily on her. I have mentioned several times that there are two books which have been published comparatively recently, and which are both edited by a good friend of ours who is a great and outstanding and eloquent historian, Michael Gomes of New York City, the Theosophical Society, and both of these are pertinent to our somewhat different view of the message of H.P. Blavatsky. As I sort of indicated before, there are really kind of two Blavatskys and two messages of Blavatsky. One of them is the one that everybody knows about, and that is the Secret Doctrine. Great big bunch of books. There are several editions of it because the publishers couldn't make up their minds as to how many volumes they wanted. So the original edition had one volume, then there were two volumes, then there were three, and now they came back to two again. What the reason for these gyrations is, I am not certain, because I think what they did was that after her death, also they have incorporated a number of personal notes of hers, and they made a volume out of it, but that's no longer a volume of the Secret Doctrine. But as usual, that's not what I wanted to tell you, but I told it to you anyway, so that's how things go. In any event, the two new books, which are new in the sense that their contents have never been published before. They are called The Secret Doctrine Commentaries, great big thick book made of notes that have been discovered in Europe, and that the good editor, Mr. Gomes, had then brought here and edited. And the other, which is a smaller book, but probably in terms of content, really more valuable than the former, and this is called The Esoteric Instructions of H.P. Blavatsky. Now that's the one that I want to emphasize, and both of these volumes contain quite clear statements on the part of Blavatsky that she was, if not exactly dissatisfied with, but rather disdainful, in a certain sense, of her own magnum opus, The Secret Doctrine, and that she said about it that it was not really a book on the esoteric tradition, but that it was something, as she sort of put it, for the general public. From her comments we can deduce that she wanted to create a framework within which her more profound and perhaps ultimately more creative message could be evaluated and understood. So that the content of the secret doctrine, seemingly, so it looks now, was meant by her as a framework within which to place a much more mysterious and ultimately probably much more important and more valuable message. At the same time, it certainly would be far from me to speak in a derogatory sense of the secret doctrine, and so I think what we need to understand is that she wanted to create an atmosphere. When it is just like when you read, I am loath to make the comparison, but I'll make it just the same. Say you're reading some books by Stephen King, whom I like greatly. I think he's a worthy successor of Howard Phillips Lovecraft, who created the genre, of weird fiction. But let's say these people create an atmosphere. And then within that, and I'm sure that is true of motion picture, and so then within that atmosphere you may have the action. But without the atmosphere, the action would probably be rather ineffectual. But on the other hand, if the action content is not added to the atmospheric element, then you also are missing something very big. So therefore, you got to remember that we are dealing with late 1800s, which was a time period very different from ours, and wherein, let's say, people were looking for something that would embody, and I think I mentioned that trinity last time, fact, truth, and reality. And they could find all that in the same book. Well, of course, that's impossible, because the emphasis definitely must be on one of these. But you see, it was the Dark Ages when a very materialistically oriented science had taken over, and Carl Jung called the 19th century for that reason the true Dark Ages, so out of this difficult raw material, she was trying to create a little cosmos, which in its spirit, in its understanding, would allow people to catch on to what her principal mission was. And that apparently was what she wanted to write and communicate in the time period when she was no longer here, because she died before the 19th century changed into the 20th century, but she definitely had something in mind. Now, what she had in mind is very largely contained within and revealed in these two books, which I mentioned before. Maybe not so easily to be discerned in the secret doctrine commentaries, because the secret doctrine commentaries were a sort of a class that she conducted. I'm not sure which one of her residences, it was in London in both cases, whether she was still in Mabel Collins's residence or whether she had already moved to Annie Besant's house, but in any event, so she conducted regular intervals classes there about her secret doctrine, and people would ask questions. And then she would answer the questions, and there were already people there who knew how to, write, well, what do you call it, the very fast writing. Yeah, that's it, And so there were people there with such skills, and they wrote it down. So the questions and the answers are in that book, the secret doctrine commentaries. But just because of that question and answer format, and I think also the obtuseness of the majority of the persons who were there present asking questions, it's not a terribly informative book. There are informative, interesting passages in it. And then she wrote the esoteric instructions, which are not in a question and answer format, but wherein she was trying to, and she says so, really desperately trying to communicate the true essence of her message. And the true essence of her message was, if you don't mind me using a term from a slightly different milieu, was a form of mysticism. In fact, a very nice gentleman who was here with us for many years, Mr. Will Ross, very, very astute theosophical student, used to say that what is important is the mysticism of theosophy. Well, this is what she was trying to convey in the various chapters, various lessons in the book, The Esoteric Instructions. And again, she did not have the opportunity and the time to finish them well, because even theosophists are subject to the visitations of the Grim Reaper, and when he comes, well, then usually you go. See, and that's what happened there too. So let's say her more profound message was only touched, really, by the time she died. These things happen. That's why if you have something important to do or to say or to write, you know what? Do it now. Because if you wait too long, the likelihood it's not going to happen. Or it's going to happen very inadequately, If I don't mind a little personal note once again, I have about over 400 handwritten pages of memoirs that he wrote, and they are sitting there in some box in my room, and I never look at them, which I'm sure is my fault. But let's say, that is often the way things go. You do something and then you're interrupted, one thing or the other, and it never really gets completely finished. And this is, of course, what happened in this case with Madame Blavatsky also. But you can see already from the material that is there, and from Michael Groms's editing and commentaries, that something very powerful was trying to come through there. Now, from the available material, I would conclude that it was primarily an approach to her message in mystical terms, not in occult terms as much as in mystical terms. And the idea being that there is a mystical task, and then I'll conclude that on that note because I talked about it before, is a mystical task that appertains to each and every human. But this mystical task can be effectively performed only when there is a certain profound preparation for it. You can't just go ahead and do it. So you have to be prepared. And that's really the secret doctrine material, much of which is, really weird stuff. Lovecraft and Stephen King together never put anything that wild together. But yet, if you read it, so to say, with the third eye, that obviously just a metaphor, You read it with the third eye, or if you read it aloud with the third ear, there is a message there, which is not so much in the words, but which comes to you through the words. And as much as we can add it up at the present time, all these years later, and try to make it useful, it appears to be very briefly stated this, that we have a transcendental or mystical task as human beings. There is some work that we have to do. And it's not reading about Atlantis and various New Age spin-offs of the secret doctrine, because, the old lady Blavatsky has been called, probably fairly accurately, as the grandmother of the New Age. Now, that's really a granny for you, see? But rather that there is and that message is very personal, very individual, and it's does not consist of a belief system, but rather of a happening, of a practice in the life of the individual, wherein the lesser, the outer, the personal self, the sort of thing that in modern depth psychology is often referred to as the ego, which means, the carrier of consciousness with the 5 functions and things of that sort, but it's, your outer selfhood that developed. Usually, ego development is said to develop sort of when the child is maybe past 4 years old, and you can tell that the portentous pronoun I, maybe ameliorated by a modification of me, appears in the vocabulary of the child, and so because it begins to discover I am me, and so which of course is a useful development, but the great problem is that most people, to a greater or lesser extent, get sort of stuck in that phase of development. That's why most people, when you discuss matters with them, tend to really voice a point of view that is more childish than anything else, because they never came out of that I and me phase to something greater. So Mother Blavatsky is trying to tell people that this is the heart of the esoteric tradition, that we, the lesser self, can unite with and become closely connected with a transcendental, a higher, a spiritual selfhood. And when these two are together, then you have a complete human. Until they have come together, the situation is very incomplete, which is again in different words, very much the same thing that C.G. Jung was saying. He said there has to be an individuation. There has to be a process taking place wherein the person becomes an indivisible unity. The German word for such a unity is ein individuum, which comes from the Latin. So this is what she is beginning to bring forth, and of which you see very powerful reverberations already, these esoteric instructions. So if you want to be introduced to her more secret, more personal, and certainly transcendental message, then read the esoteric instructions. Also, I hope again, the epidemic crisis seemingly having pretty much gone away, that we can resume. We called it a class years ago in the indications of that esoteric message, and then this time we'll have sort of several people interact in it, and not always just my own loudmouth self, like we did before, although the people enjoyed it, and then we will know more about discussing what this message really is that she's trying to put across. So that is that part. Now, for this evening, we had planned, and I think that we can do some of it, even with me shouldering this pain that I'm carrying, that we can look at the on other aspect, on other side, more infrequently mentioned and publicized than the other, and that is a Western, perhaps at least in part mainly European branch, a tradition of the greater esoteric tradition, namely the one that has rightly or wrongly been denominated the Rosicrucian tradition. Now, where does HPB refer to the Rosicrucians? She interestingly enough, while I said, it's a tradition that seemingly originated in Europe, seemingly it originated there, but she mentions it in connection with a very un-European topic, namely the founding of the United States of America, the writing of the Declaration of Independence and of the American Constitution. Now, what do you make of that? Well, without going into all kinds of details, although I can point to the sources where you will find it, because there was a smallish book by the great and marvelous teacher Manly Palmer Hall entitled The Secret History of America. Now it's incorporated in a somewhat larger book, which is America's Secret Destiny, but it has that one in it too. And in this Secret History of America, she mentions that there were some mysterious people who showed up, heaven knows where from, at the time when the founding fathers, with their beautiful wigs, and what I really like about that period is the dresses of the men. People really knew how to dress. Lovely lace at their neck, nice long frock coats, buckled shoes, and it all stood for something. In any event, that in that company there appeared, and depending on the accounts, not just once, but repeatedly, some mysterious strangers. Among them one who apparently was instrumental in persuading the founders to sign the Declaration of Independence. He gave a very rousing speech, and he persuaded those who were not maybe entirely decided yet. It was a mysterious, I'm not going into details, you can find it. It's in the book, but they referred to this particular gentleman as the professor, and he was a friend of Benjamin Franklin. Now, we know that Benjamin Franklin had a lot of strange associations, and many of them were of a quite esoteric nature. And when publishing some material about that incident of the professor with his rousing speech, which concluded with the statement, "America must be free." You know what, that's still a pretty good statement. It has not really lost its relevance. But let's say, obviously there was some question about where the heck did you get this information? Where did it come from? And the editor of the magazine, The Theosophist, who was none other than H.P. Blavatsky, wrote an editorial comment on it, and she said, yes, in fact, she said something, we have documentary evidence in our possession. I think that's pluralis majestaticus, as we call it in Latin. It's when you say we. In any event, to the effect that there were several brothers of the Rosy Cross, those are the very words, who were involved in the independence movement that became the United States, and that this particular story relates to that. And she mentions brothers of the Rosy Cross. Now, all right. So who are these brothers of the Rosy Cross? Incidentally, if you like to be, proud in a local sense, the person who was responsible for unearthing that document was the man who founded the Crotona colony here on Crotona Hill, Mr. A.P. Warrington, and who was the big leader of the American Theosophical Society for a long time. I never had the privilege of meeting him anymore, although I knew his widow, Betty Warrington, marvelous old lady. In any event, actually, we Hollywoodites had something to do with this discovery. Come on, we should rejoice over this, jump up and down, do something dramatic. In any event, this and some other statements of Blavatsky, who was the editor of that magazine at that time, indicate that she definitely felt and had evidence, so she was convinced of the presence in those critical times of U.S. history of several brothers of the Rosy Cross. All right, now who are these brothers of the Rosy Cross? We've got to remember, of course, that the esoteric tradition, the can be, whatever other names can be given to it, that the esoteric tradition was very powerfully represented in many parts of the world, although if you read the Secret Doctrine in the earlier writings of Blavatsky, you might get the impression that the esoteric tradition all had to do with India. And that's nonsense. Obviously, India was a fashionable place, let's put it that way, at the time. The Brits were in India already by that time. By the time Blavatsky and Olcott went there and came out there already, the Great Rebellion, as it was called, the Sepoy Rebellion took place in India, a big political and military crisis and all of that. So India was in the news, and with its religion, with its art, with many of its features, it had considerable popularity and prominence. And were mostly British scholars, although some came from Germany to England, like Max Müller was the big Indologist, and a number of others. Monier Williams, these were the people who, and the poets like Sir Edwin Arnold, whom I can always greatly recommend, because if you want to get a real feeling of Buddha, for instance, read The Light of Asia. It's more gripping, it's more transforming than the Buddhist scriptures themselves. At least the ones that... The Buddhist scriptures that were written for monks. And, monks are a peculiar kind of people. I went to school with them, so I know them. No, Christian monks, not Buddhist monks. It was fashionable to quote Indian scriptures, to use Sanskrit words and things of that sort. It doesn't mean that those words are more descriptive of spiritual realities than if they were in Latin or in Greek or even, for heaven's sakes, in English. So Blavatsky went along with the fashion, as we probably all should, because you can, when you got something important to do, sometimes you can ride on the bird of fashion into where you want to go, because you will get attention to what you are doing, and that's what she did. But she never implied, and she certainly knew very greatly, that the esoteric tradition, the alternative mystical tradition, as somebody called it, was very widespread, and certainly not only present in India. Therefore, this book that I just mentioned, namely the Esoteric Instructions, don't start with the Vedas or with the Buddhist sutras or things of that sort, but they start with a mysterious figure about whom really not a great deal is known, but Blavatsky was a good one to dig up information about obscure and yet important figures, and I mentioned him before, Simon Magus, who is Simon the Magician, who is also credited with being probably the first person in history who can justly be called a Gnostic. And his fame is very, very widely spread. As I said, it even appears in Celtic lore, and he appears in not such favorable fashion in the New Testament, in the Acts of the Apostles. but in any event, just very, very quickly, because I need to move on from there to the successors of these people in a later historical period, namely the Rosicrucians, that and this, this is quite reputable cultural, anthropological, and historical research in the 20th century, I would say primarily, has disclosed that the important figures and carriers of what might be called the historical tradition have always been in the world. I think it was Dr. Elwood, my friend from USC, who wrote about it and said that the primordial shamans, the first magicians, were the first carriers of the esoteric tradition. And from there they went on, and then they became the prophets. Just like the prophets of the Old Testament are the successors of the shamans. Because what do the shamans do? They talk to the spirits, they talk to the gods. And not only that, anybody can do that, but they talk to them. See, that's a more tricky task. And and as I think Elwood wrote in one of his books that the most important fellow in a little village in the jungles or in the Siberian milieu, the most important fellow in the village is not the village priest, but it is the shaman. The shaman interacts with the other world. He talks with the spirits. He talks with the gods, and they talk to him. So the shaman is an agency that joins this world and that, the other world, and that's of extremely great importance. Now, that being the case, this role then receives various names. Shaman is really a word of some Siberian tribe, and the scholars were digging around out there in Siberia years ago, and they found these weird people who were talking to gods and spirits, and who were talked to by them. They called them shamans, which is in some Siberian lingo. Okay. Now, one of the successors of the shaman in later society is who? The magician, the magus, as is called in Latin. And what does the magus do? Well, he does what the shaman does in his own way too. Namely, as somebody said, magic comes from the root M-A-G, like magnus, like magnitude, and like magnification, like all of that. And it means making larger, enlarging human consciousness, enlarging the transcendental contact of the human being. That's what the magus does. And so this tradition, of course, is very closely connected with the ancient mysteries and with Gnostics and people like that. And when we are looking throughout history to try to find representatives of this mysterious tradition, of this underground river of spirituality that runs under the ground, like you can see some evidences of such underground waterways, say in the Arizona desert, you go there and you say nothing but sand, dull situation, and then all of a sudden you see a sort of a line, and along the line there are some trees, there is some vegetation. Why? Because underneath it is some water. So it's an underground stream. And so I would say the esoterica were always an underground stream that here and there would surface. And when it surfaces, then of course it attracts attention. But very often then, for a variety of reasons, it goes underground again. And so that she starts the very first lesson, as she calls them, in the book Esoteric Instruction. She extols and refers to the great importance of Simon the magician. And so we need to keep in mind that, well, of course, we are not talking here about magicians who put rabbits out of their hats. You know, we have a good magician club, the Magic Castle up here in Hollywood. It's really an interesting place. And right during the performances, they come around and give you drinks. You know, that's a good sign right there. That's a good, because spirit, you know, spirit is spirit. In any event, so this is the mediators between this world and the other, the ones who have one foot in our physical world and one foot in the other world. And, you know, life can get quite exciting that way. Again, it's not something that you should force on yourself, because if you do that, then you're messing up the process. I'm sure that you would, at least some of you would agree, if we make a statement, that the really important, the really lovely, the really fun things in life are the ones that happen, and they are not made to happen. See, they happen. Why? Says, well, how can something happen without a cause? You know, that's again this factual orientation. Well, it doesn't mean there is no cause, if you want to use that term. But the issue is that you know, the cause is are not the kind of causes that we are aware of. And that is why, even with Jesus and so forth, the imagination of the religious people made them into very human people. Well, human the prophets and the saviors of the world were, but you know what? They were not only human. As Friedrich Nietzsche would have put it, menschliches, allzu menschliches, human and very much human. And that's very important, because the human has the capacity to be there as a mediating agent between this world and the world of what the ancients would call the gods and the goddesses, and various other names can be given to it, to a transcendental dimension, that which is contacted with the transcendent function, as we call it in modern psychology. And this is of great importance because, believe it or not, probably one of the most transcendent things, if you want to use the term thing, the most transcendent elements in our nature is the transcendent function. What makes us fully and completely human is not that we can see, not that we can smell, and not that we can hear, but that we have the capacity to relate to transcendence. Now, what is transcendence? It's very simple. It's something that transcends where we are. It's beyond the dimensions wherein we are, and yet it is there. and it can be interacted with, and it can be, one can have intelligent and transformative interaction with it. And this is, so it is, that is why. And it would be interesting sometimes to have our good Michael Gomes here from New York, that this is what she has in the esoteric instructions. She says, you have the capacity to unite with your higher self, and that is high magic, la magie haute, as Eliphas Levi would call it, because that when that happens, you have fulfilled the human destiny to reunite the lower human with the higher human. This is the human task. We might think that we have various other tasks, and perhaps we do, but this is the big task. You can have become exceedingly rich, you can have had a heck of a lot of fun, which I would never discourage. There's far too little of it in this world. You can have all of that, but if you have not come to a good interaction, a good understanding with the transcendental function, you really missed the point. Why were you here in this world? Were you here just to make a buck? Well, I tell you what, that buck isn't worth much now anymore. So I don't think it's a very big objective to make it, and so forth. But or various other things that we pursue. But ultimately, the only thing, and there is abundant evidence for that in innumerable, reputable, important sources, that the biggest thing that you can do in life is to unite your lesser self with your higher self. Well, to facilitate that union, again, I don't say that you can make it, but that's magic. That's the real magic. And apparently, it was along these lines that this would be the real Theosophia, the real wisdom of the gods. And that's what it was back in Alexandria. Old Plotinus, and in this case Ammonius Saccas. Plotinus is sort of the most famous of the Neoplatonists, but Ammonius, the porter, he was a lowly porter carrying merchandise from the ships in Alexandria to the city. But he was also an illumined sage. So he's the one who came up with the term Theosophia, the wisdom of the gods. Not the wisdom of mere humans, not the wisdom, if it can be called that, the wisdom of politicians, not the wisdom of the nabobs of Northern California, or what of Silicon Valley, they talk about the Russia, they have these, what do they call the Russian rich people now? Yeah. And the thing is, none of that. I think there was someone who has been revered for quite a long time in Christendom who said, "Not as the world giveth, give I unto you." And it hasn't been hasn't been paid all that much attention to, but is. So there are subtle connections here that can be cultivated, and these are the magical connections with the world of transcendence. So apparently it is that kind of thing that Blavatsky was very intent upon, and it was her hope that her theosophy that she brought would be largely concerned with that task. Whereas we already mentioned, such was not the case because of circumstances, because she died too early, and because the people who thought that they were following her were not really following her. They were following their own balderdash, and that's the way it always is. Men, I think it's in the Gospel of Philip, is the statement that men create their own gods, and then they worship their own creations. And of course this needs to be understood not only in the sense that, I don't know, the ancient gods, which actually each one of them had a legitimate reason to be regarded and to be worshipped. I mean, it wasn't just that, some Greek or some Roman thought, what the heck, we need a big god, so there is Zeus or Jupiter, let's make him, That's not the thing, but people who discover the deeper realities and the beings in the deeper realities then really have something. No. All right. Why am I digging all of this up? Because obviously this effort to find the greater, to find our own greater self, which from a certain time on in magical philosophy, for instance, was often referred to as the holy guardian angel, which is a Christian concept that maybe if you look in Jeffrey Hudson and places like that, you will find that at least these seers like Mr. Hudson and others really have encountered guardian angels that looking out for particular people. And by gum, the way life goes in this world, I would say that that's a good thing. We really need some guardian angels in order to get along. But that was always there. And so when these two are, they begin to communicate with each other, and in ceremonial magic they have various stages that they describe. Again, one doesn't have to go gaga over them, but they do have a message. For that, it starts out with the vision of the holy guardian angel. And you begin to see this angelic being around you. You kind of become a little Jeffrey Hudson, And then you don't stay with seeing, but there begins a communication. And so there is now the speech, the vision, and then the interaction, and then after that, as the final stage, there is a holy wedding, union with the, as it has been called, holy guardian angel. So this is what the theosophy that Blavatsky was trying to put forth. This was the epitome, the highest level of that understanding, and that is what she was really trying to bring. Now, of course, people will come to these conclusions if they are working at it, and so undoubtedly a lot of her disciples did become theosophically inspired mystics, shall we say. But of course the mystics were there. And now I'm I got to get to the Rosicrucians if I'm ever going to. Let's say if you look at the Christian Middle Ages and with the great myths which we will be talking about, like the Arthurian myths and so forth, I mean, these, there was a tremendous amount of respect for and practice of mysticism. In other words don't matter that much. You know, so Blavatsky might have said that your higher self, the holy guardian angel, whatever that you are looking for, and the people, the Christian mystics like Saint Teresa of Avila or Hildegard von Bingen, what you're looking for is God. But you know, whatever you call it, it's there. There is something there, something great, something magnificent, something inspiring, something that is able to transform you, that it can bring to you experiences that otherwise no way, no how would be available to you. And but then, you know, history brings various developments, and they often have curious and not so very happy consequences. And one of these was the big change in the religious life of Christendom that was called the Reformation. Now, once again, I have nothing against Martin Luther. I think he was a nice, well-intentioned German beer drinker, you know. But I do have some things against John Calvin. I think he was a nasty French lawyer. A lawyer. In any event, curiously and in a counterproductive way, the Protestant Reformation practically did away with Christian mysticism, at least outside of the Roman Catholic or the Greek Orthodox Church. Just wasn't there. And if somebody tried it, the Protestant clergy were beating up on them. They didn't have Inquisition anymore, but they still knew how to persecute people. There was, for instance, Jacob Böhme, the saintly visionary shoemaker of Görlitz up around where the Czechoslovakia, it's no longer Czechoslovakia, Czech country joins with Austria way up there. And they treated that man terribly. You know, just because he had an insight into the deeper world. So, let's say, all of a sudden, the pursuit of union with God, which is, in Christian terms, the objective of Christian mysticism, was no longer there. No, Calvin would say, no, what you do is you make money. And then you give some of it to the Calvinist church, of course, as much as you can, or more. You know. But the motivating spirit behind capitalism, as some of the German sociologists, scholars have pointed out, was Calvinism. Because Calvin said, God will show you, you can tell the person who is pleasing to God, because he will become rich with money. What? Really, is God going to give you the money from heaven? But in any event, these were the things, that physical prosperity is the sign of the love of God for you. So if God loves you, He's going to make you rich. Now the concomitant statement is that God doesn't love those who are poor. And yet you have Jesus, you have St. Francis, you have all the great mystics who always said, for heaven's sakes, there are unfortunates in this world, be nice to them. But apparently their God doesn't think that way. So anyway, the reason I am bringing all of this up is that there was a big change of orientation toward the greater reality. And there is no doubt about it, again, it's just these things happen, that the Protestant Reformation virtually killed Christian mysticism in the West. Not in the Eastern Orthodoxy, because the Orthodox, they hang on to what they've got and they're never going to let go of it. They have their icons, they have their angels, they have their beautiful music and ceremony and so forth, but that was not the case in Europe. So all of a sudden, the monasteries, the churches, the activity that was so evidently directed toward being close to the divine and union with the divine wasn't there. Boom, gone. Yeah. Roman Catholics were still here and there, but now we'll come to very quickly, and I better do because my shoulder is bothering me some too. People had to work out their own mysticism. They didn't get it from the monasteries anymore because the Protestants threw the monks out. And various other things like that. All of a sudden there was no encouragement of the striving for divine union present. But I think it was St. Augustine who said a lot of wise things and also a lot of stupid things. But anyway, I think one of those saintly guys who said that anima, maybe it was Tertullian, anyway, anima naturaliter Christiana, that the soul is by its nature Christian, by which he meant that in each and every one person's soul there is a striving for the divine, and it is there. So the Protestant or Catholics, they could not exercise that. And the results, and I'm picking on Germany now particularly because it's very relevant, and then I'll hopefully conclude, that when you go to Germany, pretty much any part, north, south, middle of Germany, everywhere, and you see a beautiful church, nice architecture, beautiful stained glass windows, nice frescoes and all. It's a Lutheran church. Why? Because the Lutherans took it away from the Catholics. That's why. And how did they accomplish that? Because there was a lot of political turmoil going on, and so a universally accepted law was passed. We even had it in Hungary, which in Latin reads cuius regio eius religio, which means he who has the rule, he has the religion. So when the German princes, dukes, grand dukes, kinglets, and their like converted to Protestantism, they took the churches with them. They threw out the Catholics, and now they are still Protestant churches. And if you want to see the modern, ugly, off-putting churches, they are all Catholic, because they've been built in an ugly, off-putting age like ours. Just go downtown and see the cathedral downtown. I mean, really, honest to God, that's the ugliest thing in God's creation. So the later periods, you can tell by the architecture as to how the religion is working. Islam, when it was at its highest point, 100, 200 years after the coming of the Prophet Muhammad, look at the fabulous architecture in places like Afghanistan, like Iran, and everything. Really beautiful stuff, Now they know is how to blow up beautiful architecture. I'm exaggerating, but it's true. It's when beauty goes out the window, then what comes in is hardly ever very pleasant. So that's the way it came to be in the Protestant countries. Now, my native land, there was a lot of struggle back and forth. And where the Protestant preachers all came to Hungary, where they came from seminary? From Holland. From University of Utrecht and places like that. Dutch Calvinism, which is a nicer Calvinism than others, because at least you can always count on a Dutchman that he will love to eat and to drink, and that's a little ways toward heavenly beatitude. And people who don't appreciate those things at all, vegetarians, vegans, and various other peculiar folk, there's something wrong there. You have lost the sense of how to enjoy yourself. In any event, this is what happened. So, however, as I was starting with St. Augustine, anima naturaliter Christiana or Tertullian, but it's really more than that. The soul is by its nature mystical. Until the human, as Jung said, as long as the human is like, it's obviously a metaphor, but the human has to have an anchor like a ship. And unless that anchor goes down into God, said Jung, the life of the person isn't worth much, unless he's anchored in the divine. So it's always there, it's always, because this is what it's looking for. And so up came the Protestant mystics. In fact, I think Mentor books that published nice little paperbacks on various nice subjects, it has a book called The Mystics, and it has called one the Protestant mystics. So there were such things. And it's from that endeavor, the frustrated mystical soul of Protestant Christendom, that the mysterious and still totally unsolved riddle of the Rosicrucians came from. Now, when you look at these pictures, and we have here somewhere, I have the colored picture of it, and I'll mention to what happened to me a number of years ago in the 1970s when I went to Europe, to Germany. I was speaking at the German language Theosophical Convention down in the Weinstraße, down where they grow the good wine. And while there, I had about close to 2 weeks, or maybe about 2 weeks to spend between the meetings that I was speaking at in Sweden and then the ones in Germany. So there I was. But fortunately, I had some friends, some of whom actually lived at one time here in Los Angeles, in the beautiful and mysterious town of what? Of Calv, in the Black Forest. Black Forest area, very close to the Black Forest area. And this town of Calw, which is really a splendid place, if you ever go in that neck of the woods, it's not very far from Stuttgart. You fly to Stuttgart and you can go there. And there you will find all kinds of beautiful stuff. And among them, a big Protestant church, once having been Catholic, which at one time had as its minister, its dean, the head minister, a very mysterious but interesting gentleman, Johann Valentin Andrea, who he died in 1654, who, so it would seem, because I don't think he ever owned up to it really. Those Protestants are cagey people. That he had written 3 mysterious books. Fama Fraternitatis, number 1, Confessio Fraternitatis, and the Chemical Wedding of Christian Rosenkreuz. In these he started the Rosicrucian mystery, which is still here and which has really never been solved. A mythos, okay? He created a myth, and the main myth is about a mysterious German gentleman, probably some small landowner or something like that, by the name of Christian Rosenkreuz, which means the Christian Rosy Cross. And this gentleman, in turn, had an inspiration or impulse or something to go away to some mysterious other country in order to learn mysterious things. According to the Fama Fraternitatis, he went to North Africa, to Morocco. Why of all places in Morocco, I don't know. But that there were we got to remember that the Arab world at that time was a place of much learning and much wisdom and much magic. It was very different from the Arab world the way it is today. And so in any event, there he meets with a mysterious group of wise people who instruct him and who send him back to Europe in order to do some good. And so he does get his instructions there. He goes back to Germany and lives there and gathers around himself a small group of people who come to be known as the Rosenkreuzer, the Rosicrucians. And why exactly that symbol is picked and so forth is never really quite clear, but it is the symbol of a cross with the rose on it, or sometimes several roses on it, and that this became the symbol of this secret Protestant, because it was in a Protestant country, secret Protestant kind of monastic order. And then time goes on, and Christian Rosenkreuz, who is the founder, then dies. And his brethren bury him, but he also leaves a prophecy that 100 years after his death, on such and such a day, he will reappear. And so Rosicrucians go on and they do their prayers, they do their meditations, where you don't really know what they do, but they're around, And then when the time is up, apparently Brother CRC, as they refer to him, Christian Rosenkreuz, comes back. And ever after they constitute, or so it is stated, they constitute a secret body of people who are looking out for the spiritual welfare of their country and possibly of the world. Now, why would that be the case? Well, because the mystical connection of the saints, of people like Saint Teresa and Mechtilde Magdeburg and all of these people, was no longer there. And so this apparently, what they are referring to is, although the secrecy aspect was always very big, they constitute a secret association somewhat similar to a Catholic monastic order, which carries on their mystical and their esoteric tradition. Now, what did this mystical esoteric tradition consist of? Well, if you read those three Rosicrucian manifestos, because they've been translated and so forth, but you don't get much clarity of what this is all about. You really don't. You get the feeling that whoever these Rosicrucians were, they loved to be mysterious, and they wanted to remain mysterious. And that's all there is to it. And after all, there is something to be said for that. Now let me, more or less in conclusion, let me regale you with my encounter with the Rosicrucian tradition. Has to do with this image when I was there in the state of ancient Swabia, namely now it I think two states have been put together, but it's Baden-Württemberg. Baden means in German means bath, to take a bath. So why would you call a country Baden? Well, because it's full of baths. In a lot of, all over Europe, already discovered by the Romans, there are all these health spas which consist of baths. So you get this usually kind of warm, ill-smelling water coming out of the ground, sulfurous water, and you go in there and you bathe in that, and it's supposed to make you well. Well, I suppose it's not much worse way of trying to take care of your health than the ones that we pursue here. In any event, Baden-Württemberg is the old Swabia of the Schwabs. So, in any event, that's where Calv is located, with that housed allegedly the original author of the Rosicrucian manifestos, and there was also at the same time a very interesting person there, as I learned when I was there, who, Württemberg was a grand duchy, and this was the reigning duchess, Princess Antonia of Württemberg. She died in 1679. And who was she the best friends with but the Reverend Johann Valentin Andrea, the Protestant pastor of the big church, who was the alleged writer about and founder of the Rosicrucians. The important thing that now the Princess Antonia of Württemberg is remembered for is that not just that she was friendly with Andrea, but that she had caused to be painted a gigantic painting in the church in Bad Tainach, which is right on the edge of the Black Forest. And I tell you, if you ever want to see a beautiful countryside, and if the weather is good, then go in the summertime over there to the Black Forest. It's really magnificent. I've been in a few countries by now, but I have, maybe because of my partially Germanic heritage, I just thought I have never seen anything so beautiful and so inspiring in the summertime. And you know, the Black Forest is really black. It's the trees are big and dark and all covered up, and so the whole forest looks black. It's not really black, but it looks black. And so my friends who lived there told me, at the neck of the woods there, in and around the Black Forest, is full of weird people. By which I mean people with seers, clairvoyance, the kind of people that we once thought populated California and especially Hollywood. You know. Now they are all in the Black Forest area. In any event, very, very interesting neck of the woods. And so my friends took me and said, we want to show you something really unusual. So what did they do? We went to the little community on the edge of the Black Forest called Bad Tainach, again a bath, and there we went to the church, obviously a Lutheran church, which became back in the 1600s, and they went over to the sexton, or whatever you would call it, the guy who takes care of the church, and no doubt gave him a few Deutschmarks to butter him up. And so he came with a great big key, and right in front of, I don't know whether there was still an altar there or not, being Protestant, but anyway, right in the sanctuary, where the sanctuary area of the church would be, two gigantic panels that go all the way up to the roof. Huge thing. And he came and opened it up, and behind it there is a huge, magnificent painting. And the painting is, they call it a Kabbalistische Lehrtafel, the Kabbalistic teaching device, but it's much more than that. It's just a great, complex Kabbalistic icon, depicting, as you will see, and I have a colored picture here that I'll put out for you to see too. And it is what it is a garden with a gate, flowers, all sorts of things, and then sort of in the back of the garden is a gigantic, beautiful, artistic tower. It goes up and up and up with many stories. And the Princess Antonia and I think some of her friends are in the garden, and they're going up into the tower. And if you look very carefully, and if you are informed about the symbolism, I think it's very likely that the interpretation is correct, that the tower is organized according to the 10 Sephirot of the Tree of Life. So they are going into the Tree of Life, which is shaped as a tower. And if they get clear up to the top, well, then they are in heaven with God. When others are there, they're walking in the garden, going up on the tower. And so this was commissioned by the Princess Antonia of Württemberg to be painted, because it was her, well, how should we put it, her own personal but huge icon of life, like the Tree of Life, and how to get beyond the physical world. It's a fabulous, fabulous painting. But you don't see it unless you get hold of somebody who can show it to you. Actually, Johann Valentin Andrea, the alleged writer of the Rosicrucian manifestos, had also written a book, Ein geistliches Gemälde, a spiritual painting, in which he explained how the representational art and painting can be used in order to instruct people in their spiritual things and their spiritual journey, and that this is one of them. And our Masonic brethren look upon it as being related to the Masonic custom of a tracing board, which is really a kind of a antique forerunner of, of a computer screen. It being that in Masonic rituals there's a great deal of symbolism, of course. And in order to experience and understand these symbols, the Freemasons always had somebody of artistic skills who would paint what they call, for the various degrees, a tracing board. In other words, it's a painting which at the same time has the symbols of that particular degree and how to progress spiritually in certain things there. And that this gigantic painting was somewhat of that order. But it is really I would say it is the tree of Gnosis. It is the tree of, shows you no longer a tree, but a building, a building of transformation. First you go into the garden, which is the natural world, and then from the natural world you go into this fabulous mystical structure. And so my friends knew about it, some others do, and I think largely originally at my instigation, because I was so taken with the place. Now it has become a sort of Gnostic place of pilgrimage, and particularly our good priest Peter Reardon from Texas goes there very frequently. I think, if I am not mistaken, he will be on his way to Bad Tainach fairly shortly, in order to do something really quite important there. So in any event, it has become a sort of a esoteric place of pilgrimage. But the implication and the thing that everybody seems to be advocating there is that Princess Antonia was, you guessed it, a Rosicrucian. Well, after all, she was a friend of what could be the alleged founder, the one who wrote all the Rosicrucian manifestos. So it's not an entirely unlikely situation. In any event, there's a very beautiful article in the current bulletin of the Masonic body, the Research Lodge, which is located in Pasadena, by an old friend of ours, Daniel Rivera, past master of Elysian Lodge and others, and he writes there, I'm going to quote him a little bit, wherein he says that the design begins at the bottom, with an initiate at the outer door, where the fences are, where you come in, holding an anchor, a cross, and a flaming heart, symbols of faith, hope, and charity, who gazes upon King Solomon's temple and the stunning panorama, a garden with a variety of plant, animal, and bird species of alchemical import, the 12 sons of Israel, the 12 apostles, Old Testament prophets, all surrounding Christ, the stone which the builders rejected, herein personifying Malchus, the kingdom, and any when people go through the garden and then up into that fabulous tower. We try to make and give you a little bit of an idea. These are black and white copies of the painting, and it is certainly a major and monumental because it's gigantic, and you can't believe how tall that doggone thing is. You know, it really is. An indication that these people were teaching a process of transformation which relates to transformational patterns such as the Kabbalah and others, but not necessarily only the Kabbalah, but the indication that there is a transformational sequence if you are within the tradition, if you do your prayers and study the necessary literature, wherein step by step you will ascend onto a higher state of consciousness. And that this kind of a transformation, this kind of a transformational sequence is the task of the human being. But as such, it is the task of the Rosicrucian, because that became the Protestant mystical school that was teaching transformation at that particular time. The Rosicrucian, there were various movements thereafter that called themselves Rosicrucian, both in Germany and in America. And they all had to do with the awakening of the spiritual forces, the transformation in the human. And here in America we had two. One became a very popular movement for a long time, although that is no longer the case. There have been some difficulties. The Amorc, ancient mystical order Rosicrucis, headquarters located in San Jose, California, and its founder was an occultist of considerable distinction, H. Spencer Lewis. The work was continued by his son. And another one was a little closer to the theosophical movement, because this gentleman, I never met him anymore or his family, but this was Max Heindel, who was a German. His family name was Maximilian von Grashof, and he was of a Danish and German family. You know, that at that time there was a lot of hassles going back and forth between Denmark and Germany over the province of Schleswig-Holstein, and so there were Germans there, Danes there. Anyway, very interesting gentleman who lived here in California. He was the vice president of the Los Angeles Lodge of the Theosophical Society. And then he went to Germany. And initially he went to Germany because he wanted to see Rudolf Steiner, who was a pretty famous person by that time. But as this often happens, when two very talented people get together, they don't get along with each other. That's what happened there too. So Heindel and Steiner parted company. Heindel came back to Los Angeles, and then he and his wife started a very beautiful colony with very nice architecture in Oceanside, California, called the Rosicrucian Fellowship, which is still in existence. And he wrote a book that became very important to a lot of people in the tradition, which is called the Rosicrucian Cosmoconception. just like that title, and I love Max Heindel. I think he was a great man. But he translated German words into English, and when you do that in a book, the book may turn out to be a little bit weird. And again, but I have great respect for him. But I think that when I know what that is, because I have a other native tongue also. You think in your native language, and then you try to express it in English. Then you translate it. So I would say the Rosicrucian cosmo conception, referred to affectionately as the Cosmo by the members, is an interesting book, and it's a sort of medieval Christianized theosophy of sorts. Now, among other things, and I have to conclude. Now here I am. I was apologizing that I won't be able to speak long because of my shoulder. But let's say the Rosicrucian cosmo-conception, Mr. Max Heindel and his wife. His wife was a very, very active astrologer, which is another thing that some people don't want a lot of astrology, then they don't go to Max Heindel's outfit. But in any event, he did promote, and it became a worldwide organization. So did the Amorc Rosicrucian, and at a certain, back in the 1920s, quite early, a young and very tall gentleman from the East, born in Canada and then from New York and Chicago, came to Oceanside to Max Heindel, and that was Manly Palmer Hall. So Maximilian von Grashof was really the principal actual physical teacher of Mr. Hall, and I would say the result was definitely very commendable. And everybody who knew Max Heindel had a high opinion of him as a very, very learned, very ethical, and very nice man. I was too late here for that purpose, although I knew people who had known him. So let's say, however, and I think that perhaps Heindel would be one to agree with me, but then again he might not, that the Rosicrucians are a mystery. And to make an actual functioning organization out of them, like a bunch of theosophical lodges or so, is perhaps not the right thing. In other words, it's and Mr. Hall treated it that way. I heard Mr. Hall say, it was really quite close to me at one of his birthday parties, that he considered himself a Rosicrucian Christian. Now, where did the tradition come from? What were its details? Was there a mysterious Christian Rosenkreuz who went to Morocco or so? These things we will probably never know. Now, in the French, just throw in that one, in the French occult tradition, there is a rumor that Christian Rosenkreuz says, whose name was, that is known. His secular name, not his magical name, was Görmishausen. Von Görmishausen, little, noble family. And that is, Görmishausen was a secret Qatar. That the Qatar tradition, what was left of it, or what was, the people who weren't burnt at the stake, some of them came to Germany, and the Görmishausen family was among them. And that this could very well have been an intended sort of reincarnation, pardon the expression, a reincarnation of the Cathar tradition in German Protestant mystical guise. This is also quite possible. And the truth will never be known, probably because it doesn't need to be known. It's not a matter of factual truth, it's a matter of what I think Steiner called in good German mystische Tatsache, which is a mystical fact. So something was reborn there. Whether there is a connection with the Cathars or not, we don't know. But in any event, it seems that there was a sort of a gathering place of mystically inclined people who incorporated some Kabbalistic knowledge, perhaps some Cathar knowledge, and who continued the esoteric tradition in Europe, and apparently became so widely disseminated that even in other places, and that some of their learned members became actually associated with the founding of the United States at the Declaration of Independence in Philadelphia and elsewhere, and so that there was a very powerful crossover of this European occult or mystical tradition to the United States, which I think is worth exploring and possibly cultivating. So when all is said and done, what is said and done? I don't know. But I think what is said and done is that the mystical tradition, the alternative spirituality of the West was always there and is still there, and it has done its work like others have, and therefore we don't need to fear that the alternative spirituality will get lost. But we have to try to keep it alive. We have to study it. We have to avail ourselves of its symbolism and its transformative iconography. And we do so, then maybe we can add the phrase to it, which is part of the secular lore of the American independence, that the end of the speeches of great American leaders like Lincoln and others, that the esoteric tradition will not perish, but will continue to nourish the souls of people both on the American continent, in Europe, in Asia. Why? Because it comes from the spirit of the human, and it addresses itself to the development of the spirit, the contact with the transcendence, and therefore it cannot perish, but it will continue to be and will continue to nourish humanity. But we have to be there to pay attention to it, to listen to it, and to try to absorb the spirit of this transformative mysticism, which is of extremely great value and importance. And so a very mysterious subject. I had to speak about it mysteriously because that's the only way to speak. But let's say the mystery of the Rosy Cross is still with us, and it will continue to nourish in its own way. It has also become, at a certain point, it has become associated with Freemasonry, particularly in England, and so it has become a very important but still very mysterious fountainhead of esoteric tradition in the West. And I hope that this has been somewhat informative for you, and I thank you so very much for being here. And don't be too harsh on me, because my shoulder hurts me quite a bit. Okay, thank you very much, Ivan.